Live.
Oh yeah. It's not perfect, but it's.
Bro, it's good enough.
Yeah, anyone just walking in with it.
If we get canceled for having like a slight hair tilted, like the amount of time we try, people try to control it.
Yeah, it's on.
Wait, Kat, can you put your head down? Oh, perfect. Sorry, yes. So. All my Wes Anderson bullshit, I'll tell you that. Oh, it's perfect.
There's one person on the line. Do we want to turn on the lights or?
Did anything?
How do I find this? Okay.
You need to copy. Go to the bottom, yeah. Copy.
But then how do I get it to my phone?
Well, you can airdrop it probably. Or just,
I don't know if I'll put it in an email.
yeah. You have to go to G. You have to put a subject.
Yes. Pearl makes me feel so safe when he's here. He's just got a very calm person. And thinking about projects and was like, oh,
The lawyer that doesn't do anything.
I know.
The legal observer that just observes when he gets bullied.
They have to.
Yeah, I'm like, I feel some type of way about legal observer.
I'm glad they're there.
I'm glad they're there too, but I'm like, dude, at what point do you intervene? If someone's getting stabbed, you're gonna be like, interesting. Just take notes. Yeah. Like I work on DB. Charles, I have a question for you.
Hi, Charles.
Hey, what's up?
How are you?
So you know how you're like a legal observer?
Yeah.
At what point do you stop observing and intervene?
For LOs, technically, like never. Yeah.
So if someone's getting killed internally, you know.
Well, okay, like
Oh no, I posted it to my own personal page.
if it's literally a life or death match, then that's what it's probably better. You know, it's not an explicit guideline to that effect, but it's like okay.
Because I'm like, if someone's getting stabbed, are you gonna be like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Typically, we're not be in a situation where it's like, it's just someone going 1v1 against a cop who's trying to kill them with nobody else around, right? That'd be unusual. Though, there has been something like this in the past.
Yeah.
Right, that was so.
This came up because I said, I heard your voice, and I was like, Charles is here. I always feel safe when he's around. Like, if I saw you at the protest, even we were like seeing squish buzz, I just
Right.
was like, I saw you and I was like,
Yeah. The other common misunderstanding is that people think that we're there to like closely observe counter protesters as well, and that's not true. We're only there for the cops.
oh yeah, for sure.
So if they're colluding with the cops, if cops are in the vicinity, then yes, well, right? But like, yeah, a situation like Sunday where it's like literally you know, design this like surrounding on several sides, albeit still being outnumbered, right?
Yeah.
It's like not one where we can like just put stuff
Yeah.
at every location. Right? So, yeah. That's the cinch. That's the cinch. Yeah.
Oh, careful.
Sorry. Oh,
Okay,
that's
I
right.
think it's still.
But yeah, come on, Bob.
Oh, yeah.
Now you see the point.
Yeah, I stole this from my neighbor. There's our
You stole this?
Yeah.
I thought I was like
They
a
were
whole
charging
power.
their Tesla with it. Like, it's across the.
Oh, they were trading. You said fuck that. Wait, was it the neighbor that got like the truck? Or-
Not them, it's different.
I like how we just took up all the front seats.
Just talking about
Oh.
otherwise.
This is these. You want
That's
one?
right.
It's up to you, I'm sorry.
I took 3. Mine works.
Is somebody gonna sit here? Or
I can.
or
Yeah.
no, I took my I don't really
I think.
we should put more chairs. I'll probably, if anything, I'll sit here. If that's okay.
On the same level. The messaging is like today.
I'm gonna do it. It's a
Yeah.
We're finally doing something. He's taking it seriously. You good? Yeah? Not nervous? No nerves? A little bit? I'm gonna ask a lot of questions. Hope you said it. Like, excuse me, sir. What about? What about the French? What did they have to say? Or the
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hi y'all. We're gonna get started in about 7 minutes. If you need to use the restroom, now would be the perfect time to do it. It's just right here. You can go over front of the presentation first. And yeah. All right, continue.
Yes. That one. I appreciate the 13-12. Very subtle.
I have a big,
Still not straight, that's why. Oh,
No, I have these songs that are very I know. We are exorcists. We're scared. I'll explain to my friend today. I was, okay, I can't see both. Yes. I came up with it. I would say, like, no, wait. Yeah. Now, whether that's music or not,
I just need a lower voice.
I'll be up front.
I would be very.
How's the live stream?
Let me check it out.
No, is this a- can do that?
I think it's just, it should be safe. Oh, right, I think it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about it.
Yeah.
Like very anti-communist.
Yeah. Not like.
And so like, oh my gosh.
Clap twice if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. Hi y'all, welcome to All of Our Books. We are a not-for-profit radical bookstore and community space. All of the profits that we make from the store go directly back into our programs, our mutual aid programs, speakers, events, Q&As, book clubs, and things like that. Just so you guys know, this is our last event in this space. We will be moving 2 blocks up the street, close by, but after this Sunday, we will be closing this space. So please enjoy, bask in the atmosphere while you can. And we will be doing a pretty heavy push on fundraising in the upcoming month, just so that we can get everything started up and let everything be good. So keep an eye out on social media, please if you can, share with your friends. And yeah, so today we are doing a teach-in on Vietnam for Victories, and I'll get off my.
Hey everyone. I'm gonna wait for these people to get settled. Just show of hands, how many Vietnamese people we got in today?
Hell yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah, so the Vietnam War is going to be a part of this, but not the biggest part because I wanted to focus on how Vietnamese people built power overall. And by the time the Vietnam War comes around, kind of the Communist Party has taken power and they're just executing colonial war against the imperial forces. But you know that war is the reason why all of us are in this room right now. I'm sure all of our parents are refugees. So we're going to learn more about the events that led up to that, how early they were involved in the colonization of Vietnam. So these are the 3 main sections. France and Japan are putting together because Japan was like a blip in the French occupation. The United States was also involved there, but they're the biggest second chapter. And then the third part will be joined by Luna Oy, who's a comrade in Vietnam. She's going to talk about all the successes that their independence has allowed them to accomplish since then. We're going to be busting a lot of myths, so whenever something comes up, I'll show this slide, and then I'll talk about kind of the misunderstandings, because I think, even especially in the diaspora, there's a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of straight falsehoods, and for such a central war to the 20th century, it's extremely misremembered. So I'm going to start with the French way back in the 1800s. At the time, Vietnam is a feudal society. There's a lot of infighting between different kingdoms. There's basically 3 big ones, and this one, this guy, he's the first one. He's the first one to unify it. He uses French assistance for this. They have missionaries as early as 1600. And in the 1780s, he forms a alliance with the French in order to unify the country. So the monarchy has long been collaborators with the imperialists. So of course, they set up in the back like 2 generations later. They take over Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and they form the colony of Indochina. And Vietnam at this time is not Vietnam. It's not even legal to say the word Vietnam in the colonies at this time. They split into 3 separate regions. French colonialism has all the familiar horrors of colonialism. Most of you have probably seen this video, or some of you may have seen this video of this French woman throwing coins to poor children, watching them scramble like birds. These are resistance fighters who get captured and executed. And the horrors of colonization are well documented, and they're no different in Vietnam. There are resistance movements, but because they're all of them kind of centered on restoring these separate monarchies, which were never fully aligned with each other, most of them fail. That's where we come to the successful colonial strategies with the Communist Party and Ho Chi Minh. So this is Ho Chi Minh in 1910s, 1920s in France. He was one of the founding members of the French Communist Party, having been involved in some nationalism struggles in Vietnam. He leaves to go learn about the world and learn about Westerners in the whole world. He doesn't really believe that people can be so cruel. And then he goes and he sees them being cruel to their own poor people. That sort of leads him up to communism and Leninism. While he's organizing with the communists, he gets given the thesis on national colonial question, and he's stoked about it. And he says he's in his room reading it aloud to himself like he's giving a speech. That's such like an endearing image. So there's a myth that Ho Chi Minh was not really a communist, and he was kind of just playing that card to try to gain assistance to liberate Vietnam. But as early as 1910, which is 50 years before the beginning, he is a dedicated communist, a member of the French Communist Party, a founding member, and he's doing a lot of organizing from then on. He goes to the Communist International. How many people know what the Communist International is or was? Okay, so Communist International was like a congress of many different nations led by the USSR. They had schools that would teach organizing principles to people in all kinds of different countries. And Ho Chi Minh was one of these people. He was in Moscow and China and back and forth. He traveled all over the place. And by the way, he used like 100 different names in his life. I would say Ho Chi Minh for expediency, but he really used, I think, more than 100 names in evading the French authorities. So he returns to Vietnam in the 30s, starts the Vietnamese Revolutionary Youth League. And it's important that this predates the Communist Party, because one of the biggest takeaways I found while studying this was that they were really willing to make alliances with other non-aligned, not perfectly aligned organizations. They were able to say, you know what, like, this is not the time for this fight. Let's get the French out first, and then we'll figure it out. So included in the Vietnamese Revolutionary Youth League were kind of bourgeois institutions, even some like monarchists who just really wanted the French out. But since they were largely leftists, they splintered. They come back from the Vietnamese Communist Party in 1930, and they stay in the Vietnamese Communist Party from 1930 to this day. So I think that's a really big testament to their organizing abilities, to their ability to solve compromises and contradictions. This is sort of a big part of their strategy, was knowing when to fight and when to build power. So, you know, when it first starts, they're just doing those activities. They're doing education, they're down to the countryside, they're ingratiating themselves to people. And they know they're not strong in fights. So there's some like isolated incidents of you know, resistance, of raiding armories to build up guns and weapons and power. But they recognize that as time goes on, they can ramp up the military activities, but it's to go too early would be to court disaster. This is a little sample from one of their newspapers. So like I said, they were doing a lot of education at this time, and for the next 15 years, they're starting like farmers associations, unions, and there's members of the Communist Party in all of these different organizations. And I want to like reiterate that it's 15 years until they do their big first action. I think here in the West, we have a lot of people in movements who are really impatient. They think that the revolution is going to happen tomorrow, and it's just not realistic. So with the outbreak of World War II, they're going to see their first opportunity to really strike back. France surrenders to Nazi Germany like pretty much immediately. As part of that agreement, the Axis takes over all of France's colonial possessions, including Vietnam. So they send the Japanese to take control of Indochina at this time still, and the French are basically stepping back. They're still technically in power. At this time, also the OSS, which later becomes the CIA, links up with Ho Chi Minh in forms an alliance in order to do kind of like sabotage against the Japanese forces. And it's this which really gives them a lot of the weapons and the training that they're going to use to oust the Japanese, and then the French, and then actually the United States. Some of these same antiquated rifles will be used in the Vietnam War. So this is what I was talking about before. They see opportunity and they say, okay, now is the time. Now we can ramp up the military activities, but they never give up political activities. It's all connected. In 1945, which is as the World War II comes to a close and it becomes clear that the Axis is going to lose, the Viet Minh, this is the fighting force of the Communist Party at this time, they recognize their moment and they move to seize power in these, in all the cities. So you'll see there are crowds of hundreds of thousands of people. And one of the myths is that communism was imposed upon the people, but having spent the last 15 years organizing the people, being among the people, and educating, they're able to rally, even though there's only 5,000 Viet Minh at this time, they're able to rally hundreds of thousands in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon at this time, Hanoi, and all the major capitals, and basically just take over because there's just too many people, and the Japanese occupation recognizes that there's not enough of them, and they sit down. Following this, Ho Chi Minh leads the Declaration of Independence, which directly quotes from the American Declaration of Independence in an effort to appeal to the Allies to say, hey, look, you're establishing the New World Order, you're supposed to be about liberty and independence, and they're hoping that they're going to respect that. Obviously, we know that they don't. So after the August Revolution, when the Democratic Republic of Vietnam was established, theoretically, it should be a free and independent country. But the Axis Allied powers obviously don't approve that. They allow the French to retake possession, and the French invade and take over most of the cities that the Viet Minh have taken. And they're forced to retreat into the mountains of the river. So this is just to show that sometimes, it's not a straight line. Sometimes you have to dip back into other strategies and be flexible. And they did not have the strength to stand up against the full might of the French army, now not started World War II. So they retreated to the mountains, continued political activities, and started guerrilla warfare. A quick note on the political activities that they were doing. Some of the soldiers in the French occupation army were colonial subjects, were conscripted and forced into service. There's one quote here from a Algerian soldier who was captured and then re-educated. And Victories has a funny quote about only Americans could think of education as something like torture. And so when you hear re-education, re-education camps, it doesn't need to be torturous or anything like that. So they re-educated this guy. He goes back, and he's one of the many Algerian soldiers who is forced to fight in Vietnam. He goes back and forms the Liberation Front in Algeria. Some of them actually stay in Vietnam and fight as well as part of the pre-war activity. So they're doing a little war during this time, knowing that they don't have enough power. But something shifts when in China at this time, Mao is victorious over Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist forces, and they gain a powerful ally and a source of weapons and material and training. So this is when they go, okay, now we have it. It's time to really ramp up military activities. The biggest battle in this, kind of most famous one, is Dien Bien Phu, and it's a fortress in the valley. And the French thought that they were luring the Vietnamese into the trap. They said, like, this is our strongest place. We're gonna mass up there, and we're gonna lure them in and destroy them. And this is Go Nguyen Giap, which is he was a general of the Vietnam at this time. He has less of a role in the Vietnam War, but he was a general at that time too. He's considered, even by Western historians, one of the greatest military minds of the 20th century. So the French are in this valley, and they're like, what are they going to do? They might have artillery from the Chinese, but they don't have any trucks, they don't have any planes. Like, are they going to disassemble it and carry it by hand at the mountains and reassemble it? So yeah, that's exactly what they did. To go back to the importance of the political work, this is hundreds of thousands of people carrying heavy things through hundreds of miles of jungle and mountainous terrain. You can't force 100,000 people to do that, 200,000 people to do that. You have to really believe in the cause. And so with that, the Vietnamese are victorious at Dien Bien Phu. And in fact, the beginning of the battle was so close to the French that the French commander goes to the bunker and kills himself, rather than like space shame back home. So this is the second time in like 30 years that you should be like, oh, okay, cool, right? Like they secured independence. But because of the meddling of imperial powers, that's not what happened. They split the country at the 17th parallel, and in the north, they see the North Indies, but they're just so, the party is just so dominant there that they can't claim any power to it. And then in the south is like the state of Vietnam, later the Republic of Vietnam. And the first leader of that is the emperor of the French installed. So one of the big myths, especially diaspora, is that the Americans got involved in democracy. If anything, they got involved to defend the monarchy. And later on, the leader of South Vietnam rigs an election with the CIA's help, and then takes power that way. So there's never any real democracy in South Vietnam. As part of this agreement, they agreed to have a general election 2 years later for the whole Vietnam to be in charge. But Eisenhower and the U.S. administration know that Ho Chi Minh would win that landslide. He was the one who led them out of Japanese occupation, the one who led them out of French occupation, and so they don't allow the election to happen. And that leads up into the American War, because this treaty doesn't last very long. Basically, both sides are fighting immediately. And the Americans get involved in the Gulf Tonkin incident, which is a supposed attack on the U.S. Navy ship. It's since been admitted by the U.S. government and military that it was completely made up. There was no attack on the ships. There were no ships anywhere near it. They made it up as an excuse to get involved in the war. Over the course of the war, the U.S. drops more bombs on Vietnam and Laos than is dropped the entire Pacific and the entirety of World War II. To this day, there's unexploded ordnance. Agent Orange famously still has lingering birth effects. So the destruction is really untold and tragic. But on the other side, there's the heroism of Vietnamese people. So at the time, they are using a lot of Soviet equipment, which is a couple of years out of, like, maybe up to 10 years out of date from the Americans. But they're considered today by even Western historians to be the finest anti-aircraft force at the time. They have their own planes, their own jets, and everything. And that brings me to another point, which is that myth about like rice farmers and peasants kind of beating the mighty U.S. empire. They were outgunned for sure. They were overmatched for sure. But to think of them as all these like peasants with old rifles, I think there's two things. One, it's just kind of racist to think that these jungle people can't be sophisticated enough to use technology. And the second thing is that it makes us think that imperialism can't be beat in a toe fight. That's exactly what it is. So this means funny, but not actually. So at this time, this is sort of concurrent with the Black Panthers activity in the U.S. They put up a very strong fight against conscription, against the draft. They recognize their solidarity with Vietnamese people, and it's a big part of their campaign at this time. Even up to they offer to send people to fight for the Vietnamese in the war. This is not taken up, obviously, but the Vietnamese government does offer to release the American prisoners of war if the U.S. releases Huey Newton Bobby Seale.
Oh, that's crazy.
Obviously. So by the time the Tet Offensive got to stalemate, and part of the Vietnamese strategy has always been the international outcry. It was part of their strategy with the French as well. They know that Ho Chi Minh famously says, like, you don't have to win, you just have to not lose. And so they launched this huge offensive, and it really shows the Americans who were at this time telling the public, like, we're about to win this, we're about to win this, we're about to win this. But they stormed the whole country and they proved that incorrect. And the public opinion returns, and that's just basically started the drawdown of troops in Vietnam. So there's a very like common like lost cause kind of bullshit with veterans of the U.S., which is we're like, oh, we could have won if like it wasn't the 50s, or we could have won, but they didn't send enough troops, or we could have won, but the list goes on and on. But it was a stalemate right before this, and all of this just to say like, okay, yeah, you could have won if you won. In 1975, Saigon was liberated. You'll note that this is a tank and not a guy in flip-flops. So, again, we're dealing with like a modern professional army. It's important to note here the difference between the People's Army of Vietnam, PAVN, and the National Liberation Front, which is sometimes called Viet Cong, which is pejorative. The Viet Cong were the guerrilla fighters who were kind of maybe going to be flip-flops. PAVN were the guys with the Air Force and things. And they call in America, they call the liberation of Saigon Black April. That's today. This was today. What was it? I can't math, but this was today, 50 years ago. In America, they call it Black April, and it's considered this tragedy. And I always feel so sad for my fellow Vietnamese people when they're talking about the tragedy of our victory. Really, this is something to be extremely proud of, that the U.S. at the height of its military power was defeated. And in Vietnam, it's Independence Day. It's a party that's parades. Here we see like representatives of ethnic minority groups, and I just think it's so sad that we in the U.S. frame it as a tragedy when really it's a great victory. So in the post-war period, rebuilding begins, and another big myth in the diaspora is like, oh, communism in the country, and yes, there were a lot of difficulties in the post-war period. They have been in war since at least 1930. If you include like the dynastic wars before that, it's hundreds of thousands of years of continuous warfare. And again, the volume of bombs dropped is truly incredible. Agent Orange sprayed 20% of the forest and 2.2% of food crops. And so to think that this didn't have an effect, it's going to lead to some issues is just ignorant. This next slide is kind of disturbing. To this day, Agent Orange causes birth defects. It'll be 5 more generations before the markers are out of Vietnamese people's DNA totally. And so the myth is that communism ruined Vietnam. And yes, there were difficulties, but continuous warfare ruined Vietnam, imperialism ruined Vietnam. And it's only through the leadership and the tenacity of people that they were able to survive. So part of that is the going white reforms, which is sort of analogous to like Deng Xiaoping's reforms in China. They're like liberalizing market reforms. This is what a lot of people will say, like, oh, we're not communist anymore. But the choice at this point is starve perfectly or survive imperfectly. So they do these reforms because the IMF, which is a source of money for developing countries, which is nominally a kind of like a charitable organization, has policy requirements. So you can't get IMF loans without liberalizing your economy, which is why a lot of sorts of products end up doing this. But the Vietnamese Congress still controls the economy through their 5-year plans. They still direct everything. So as long as a party is directing this market reform, markets don't make capitalism any more than a fish tank makes a restaurant aquarium. And they keep control of the economy so that the people are first. And famously, they just executed a billionaire for corruption. Woo! I think the biggest takeaway for me is knowing when to build power and when to use power. So all the way back to the formation of the first Communist Party, they were making alliances with nationalist parties that were not communists, and with even though the core was Marxist-Leninists, they were making alliances with Trotskyists. They were making alliances with anybody who would further strategic goals. And this picture is part of the agreements that ended the first French War. And a lot of critics of the party were saying this is a betrayal. But everything they did was preserve the revolution. And it's about knowing when you're strong enough to fight and when you're too weak and when you kind of go back and build. And we see the results of that today they were able to defeat the French and the United States. So next up is Luna. While we wait for Luna to log on, we want to do some questions.
Anybody have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Either you can come up and speak into the microphone or just like yell. So that the live stream can pick up your voice.
I can repeat the question as well.
That's valid.
I guess I have a question about the difference between the Viet Cong and then what was the other?
So the PAVN, the People's Army of Vietnam, and the National Liberation Front, which is what we call Vietnam here.
Yeah.
National Liberation Front was kind of like, and they ultimately did link up with the People's Army. So you know, North Vietnam and South Vietnam. The North Vietnam is its own country and everything. They have their own standing army. That's the PAVN. The National Liberation Front were people in the South who were rebelling against that Southern government. And in some cases they were like truly just rebels. In some cases they were part or linked up with the PAVN. And that's that half flag that you have.
Yeah. Oh, it's at the front.
Yeah.
Sorry to keep going really quick. There's a lot of, it's really synonymous with what happened in Korea with the North and the South and how the South had to fight against that capitalist government. But is there any solidarity between Korea and Vietnam that you read or that you would like to mention?
So at the time, this happened shortly after the Korean War. So South Korea is actually one of the allies of the US, and they are the third largest troop presence in Vietnam War after the US and Australia. So no, not really.
Well, I mean, like, I guess the liberated zone.
Yeah, I think at this time, this is when the Sino-Soviet split is happening as well, and all the communist powers can kind of be around each other. Right after the Vietnam War, China and Vietnam were at war as well, over like the border dispute on the northern border. So I didn't find any evidence of like linking up between, as we know, like North Korea was bombed extremely early, probably to a more intense degree than Vietnam was. One Air Force pilot in the Korean War went out on a mission and came back and said, I didn't find anything. I think I saw one him behind you.
I have a question. Can you talk about like what is the role of like Cambodia and Laos, like the other Southeast Asian countries in the context of this time?
So Cambodia and Laos are fighting their own independence wars this time as well. Let me see if I can get back to so in Cambodia and Laos, there's a lot of shifting power, and the Khmer Rouge famously come to power in Cambodia and are shortly allies of the Vietnamese. But the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is a logistics trail that goes from North Vietnam to South Vietnam to supply the fighting there, they're basically allowed to operate in this, but allowed is kind of a strong word because there's just no central power in these places that's strong enough to outside of people they wanted to. Like Laos, I think is still a kingdom at this time. So there is some, but they are protected from bombing until the end of the war by U.S. policy. But when Nixon comes to power, they start bombing everywhere. So they also feel the effects of this day with unexploded ordnance and bomb fields.
Thanks for this. I think I'm trying to understand why I'm still formulating my question. So, yes, to formulate my question, I think I'm trying to understand why were we so okay, like South Vietnam, why were they so okay with the US coming in, knowing that we did these really same sentiments around the French? Like,
so
why were they so okay?
That's a really good question. There, like I said, with the early alliance with the monarchy and the French. So since then, which was the 1800s. So there's hundreds of years of collaboration. So the elites, and especially the urban elites, become wealthy off of colonization as well, by just like the diffusion of wealth that's extracted from the country. So there is a lot of sentiment of like, Western power is good for us. It makes us rich. There was a lot of propaganda as well around Catholicism. So people say like, oh, the communists, they're going to kill you. Like they put all these pamphlets out about what the communists are going to do to the Catholics. But Catholics actually make up, there's a couple 100,000 Catholics in the Vietnamese army. To this day, Vietnam is the only communist country with a Vatican representative inside of it. Because there's so many Catholic people. So Catholicism has a lot to do with it. Collaboration has something to do with it. So there was for sure, some sector of the population that wanted to maintain the monarchy even, and then after that, the quote-unquote democracy.
That makes sense. I kind of just go through the process and like why are we going and what we've heard so much about. We didn't hear anything about the French. Like, why didn't we hear anything about the French?
Yeah.
I'm still kind of.
I think this has a lot to do with like selection bias. Like people who left when the communists won were people who were afraid of communism. So it was people maybe who were descended from people who had advantages under the French or who had comfortable lives under the imperialism. It's a similar thing in Cuba where Cuba diaspora here is extremely anti-communist because when Castro takes over, starts taking everyone's land, all of them go come here, start complaining, oh, like the communists took our land, blah blah blah. So well, maybe they shouldn't have had that much land while people started.
Slaves.
So I think it's a very similar dynamic. I think it's not a mistake. There's in OC, which is like a big center of diaspora, they still have veterans who do their little parades with the state of Vietnam flag. We're going to last like 20 years. There's that famous quote by a revolutionary fighter who gets captured in South Vietnam. They sentenced her to 20 years, and she laughs and says, "Your government's not going to last any longer." So what did I get? Andy, can you try to get in touch with Luna to see where she's at?
Yeah, I think similarly, like my mom's a refugee, and I have had very, very uncomfortable conversations with her trying to describe why I'm very anti-capitalist and communist. And she to this day has like relatives in Vietnam, and she will just tell me like, yeah, but the communists are so corrupt, like they only save all the wealth for themselves and for the government and all this stuff, which sounds exactly like the criticism of capitalism. But I'm curious because like everyone that I know here is selection bias of like the South Vietnamese, and I haven't really gotten to speak with someone who has benefited from communism, and I'm just curious what you think about like what it's actually like over there.
I went in 2016, 2018, and that was one of the big moments of my journey of naturalization. Was I went, just because I thought I should, and I was fully expecting like to see a lot of poverty and suffering, and for sure there is poverty. It's still a developing nation, but I surely didn't see any house people. There's a very strong social safety net. I saw, beer gardens. I saw coffee houses. Coffee houses there stay open all night. It's such a great culture of people just hanging out. And then I was looking it up, and the wealth inequality there is something like 20 spots lower than in the U.S. So I'm sure there is corruption. Every government has its problems, but you can look at kind of how they handle it. Exclusion. Versus how they handle it here. And it's still a journey, and again, it's survived imperfectly or not perfectly.
Can I add on that real quick? Just the response for COVID. I don't know if you saw what the response for COVID was in Vietnam versus the response in the United States. Like their healthcare and their education and everything else is free. So it's always it depends on that too. Cause it's like more of like you said, like the social stuff rather than like access to consumer goods.
Also, there has been like an influx of American veterans from the Vietnam War moving to Vietnam because their healthcare is better than what they have here.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because they should just give them like one last healthcare.
was in Orange County, and I went back to Vietnam like 2010. And it wasn't actually until we were in lockdown that I discovered that, you know, my whole life is like a lie because I've been brainwashed by my parents. So I didn't even figure out, like, wait, what do you mean that the yellow flag with the red stripes is like an equivalent to the Confederate flag? What do you mean? And then I went down into a rabbit hole, like, wait, are the people that left on the wrong side of history?
Yes.
I was like, wait, and then I'm like, but then I can never ask these questions because I'm pretty sure we all had this like, we ask the parents, okay, why is comments are bad? Can you explain? They cannot explain, and then what questions you ask, they get mad at you, and then somehow it's your fault in some way. I don't know. It wasn't even related, it's their fault anyway. Yeah, and then somehow you end up in trouble.
Yeah, I don't want to just like undercount or like minimize the suffering of refugees. It's always a traumatic experience to have to flee your home country. They're exploited every step of the way. The boat people story, especially, you know, they're ravaged by violence and corruption every step of the way. And most of them left tragically under false pretenses because they thought they were going to be persecuted for being collaborators because they were Catholic. It was a very small minority who were directly working with the Americans or the French before that. I think that's the biggest tragedy, though, is that they ran away from what could have been, you know, a perfectly good life in their homeland based on American propaganda.
So, a little bit more. The question is, do you think, because a lot of the people in OC, they're not all like, you know, higher ups or, like you said, aligned. A lot of them are just like, they're actually for Vietnam. I was wondering, is this similar to how, you know, Trump got the white people, by getting to the poor white people on his side? Is this like similar when they put the propaganda got the poor Indian people on their side? So when it's like, when they lost, they fled because of all this fear?
I think yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it for sure. I think, you know, you say OC are also big Trump supporters or were big Trump supporters. The flag of the state of Vietnam was present at the January 6th riot at the Capitol. So that gives you some idea of like. I think plenty of people were just tricked or were told something and they just went. You know, the U.S. propaganda machine is extremely efficient, and certainly Vietnam it was as efficient as anywhere else.
I have one more question on that note. I don't know if we'll be able to answer it, but so my mom was part of the boat people, and her family's first attempt to escape, like they were imprisoned by the Vietnamese government, and like I guess I'm just trying to see what's the other side of that story. Like, was escaping a crime or like?
Yeah, it's similar to like East Germany would not try to let people out because they need like all these human resources. You know, so people would go and like they would get an education in East Germany at all the socially funded schools, and they would try to leave and go to West Germany so they could buy jeans or whatever. But I think part of it is attempting to stop, like, because think about all the lives lost in Vietnam War on both sides. They're from the same side ultimately. They're all Vietnamese people. So I think part of it is to stem the outflow of people. It's because you need people to rebuild a country. If you go to Cambodia today, you can still definitely feel that this is a population that's still recovering. There's just it's only been like one generation since. So yeah, I think that part of preventing people from leaving was definitely part of the rebuilding effort. And not to say that there were not excesses. I'm sure that there were. But again, the whole narrative of like we have to escape because you know we're going to get tortured or whatever. I think is largely false.
I think that so that wasn't true. Like that was American propaganda.
What was that?
That is like you have to be persecuted.
Right. So the Americans dropped pamphlets saying like that we're typically from that was supposed to be from the Vietnamese government. That was like itemize your items so that you can, when we come to confiscate it, it'll be useful for us. They would drop people like that all over the place. The land reforms that the Vietnamese government put in place overwhelmingly favored poor people. There was no confiscation of like just personal property. They would come and take your toothbrush. They were confiscating land and industry. Even among the landlords, they were categorized into progressive and evil landlords. So the progressive landlords were people maybe who were like heads of the village or something, and those people were actually allowed to keep their land. Evil landlords.
So I guess that makes me wonder, why would the USD that we did not want us to be, we just didn't want people like us over there. Wouldn't that bring more people to the States, which is something we do?
They did want that. There's some famous images of them pushing like aircraft off carriers to make room for more people. I think that a lot of soldiers, a lot of people that were in the government of America did feel some legitimate form of debt to the people who wanted to leave. It's not like everybody in the new government is like a cartoonish evil person. I think there was some genuine concern, but it's a good question.
I actually have context to that. I've actually researched there was a month after April 30th, there was a Senate testimony where like congressional leaders were debating on how much immigrants and asylum seekers to let into the United States, which is a very familiar thing now. But there was a lot of sympathy because a lot of the veterans were like, well, they're going to be executed because they were translating and interpreting for us, and we feel it's a debt. So there was some of that for sure, but I obviously saw a lot of like xenophobia, like these criminals are dirty, they have disease. A lot of the rhetorics we're seeing around the border today, like refugees now, they said about Vietnamese people too. So sometimes even our own terms didn't know this because they're literally on the ships, so they don't know it's being sent to DC like thousands of miles away. But that is part of congressional record that we were seen as a dirty, job-stealing, drug-infested immigrants as well. We were low class and had no skills to offer. There was definitely some people at the highest levels of Congress who felt that way and still feel this way about many immigrants. So I always use that as a talking point when I'm bringing up like immigrant solidarity among these colleagues.
Yeah, at the time of Vietnamese refugee immigration, the approval rating for that in the American public was less than it was for Syrian refugees during the Syrian Civil War. And I think at that time, because now in retrospect, everyone goes, "Oh, like we welcome them, with arms." It wasn't at all. But in terms of the policy of why they would want more people to flee, I think part of it is dealing with that. I think part of it is possibly for like cheap labor, because there's all like the Asian income stereotypes about successful Asian people that leaves out Southeast Asian people who are often some of the most poor and most exploited people in the population.
And then also to add, I think refugees play a strategic political subject for the United States so that they can turn back to their former enemies or still ongoing enemies and say, look how good these people are doing here in the United States, and just tackle them so that they can be mouthpieces for the U.S. But the other thing, not really a question, but just a comment. The Viet Cong flag is super sick. It's essentially the bottom blue represents the capitalist imperialist South, and they're basically saying we need to clear out the blue so that we can get the full red with the yellow star. So it's sort of like a cool liminal thing that they're expressing. And then the other thing just another thing I noticed is that I feel like the Geneva Accords remind me of the Oslo Accords in a lot of ways, where it's sort of this other imperial power creating this mess that is strategic for their geopolitics.
It's a very familiar story, right? Like all of the Middle East, all of the conflict there, caused by just like the random. I mean, there's no Palestine caused by the random violent mass murder. So it's really cool. First countries to give diplomatic recognition to the PLO when they formed their state. They sent. I think it recently became common knowledge because I think it was illegal under international law, but they were sending weapons and training over So it's a very tight relationship. There's a lot of similarities, between these people defeating a larger, more technologically advanced Air Force or Army, and the Palestinian resistance day with the super technologically advanced Israeli. So since they are kind of like playing the line that China often is, which is diplomatically there's not much that they can do because the US has veto power in those security councils. But they do urge kind of the ceasefire repeatedly. They've been very consistent on that line.
I grew up in OC around a lot of Adidas fans.
Adidas.
So I was wondering, like, if you or anyone else has ideas about how to get our peers educated, how to get them to this level of understanding, their history, their past, any and all thoughts, because
I think a big one is like I think you do have to lead with understanding because again like they're experienced more traumatic. And it's very possible that like agents of the communist government did like commit acts against them. But I always think about that tweet, which is communists underestimate the law of persuasive power being normal. So I don't think like coming at them with a presentation like this is going to do it. But I think if you just kind of look at Vietnam today, it really is like a beautiful, thriving country today. And try to like get them to connect, I think back to their heritage in a way. That like it shouldn't be, you still need to be ashamed of this event. And in Vietnam, especially, like they're very opening, even Americans, about like rejoining the global scene. I think that kind of trying to bring them maybe up to the present would be good.
I was going to answer her question. There is organization called Victories in OC 2019. So they're doing the work of trying to re-educate the younger generation. Only 2 years. I'm like, well, you will do I don't know, it's actually doing more of it. Yeah, they're doing the work right now. They're actually having 12 weeks, or they're trying to hire for a 12-week education program for high schoolers about Los Saigon, about their history, and what have you. So there's that one. And it's like, there's a bunch of other courses that you ask earlier. So this is not like for so I follow two activists in Vietnam who one is constantly the organization is like I don't know the name, but they are constantly fundraising for help Palestinian families right now. And then the other one, they're all right at the beginning of COVID, they were all like using banners, and I believe there was it's not confirmed by the contact pictures. There was a small group of Palestinian or foreign students or maybe tourists that were also coming out making flyers as well. So there is like even out people who are trying to show the support to the school.
Can I add to that? I'm actually a volunteer with you guys. I've been supporting them since 2017. One thing I would like to add is they don't only organize young people. They actually do have an intergenerational program where they do mobilize seniors, specifically on housing affordability and young people. I think the work has proven that while a lot of our elders do share these anti-communist narratives and framings, when they themselves understand how much they've been organized by politicians locally around that around symbolic gestures, they don't actually connect with cost of living, actual local policies. Politicians on time have been horribly corrupt and unethical with budgets and regulations and develop. And so I think that once we break through that stigma and we actually do talk to what's actually going on with their lives around elder care, transit, local policies, people do start to think about things. And that's why I'm really supportive of that.
They also have an IC maybe before about other four people in
And they're native tomorrow, so they're almost coming out.
Oh,
Which
sorry.
Win, figure out the society.
What's the knowledge meeting?
Sorry, we in Santa Ana.
Oh, okay.
May 5th. So the 10. What's it called again? You can get it on the wall of Instagram.
There's actually quite a lot of like that.
I'll just go over and get live on Instagram and they have it.
Luna just tweeted that she got it done on the stream, so hopefully that means soon.
I can say something.
Yeah.
You can keep going there. Yeah, I mean, I saw a really great description of people who left Vietnam early to the United States, that they're stuck in a time and place that is gone, like forever, you know? And they're stuck in this idea of what it was when they're young. And they will tell you, like, oh, but it's so terrible now. And I think the truth that I've realized from talking to my parents is that they don't really know at all, because I find out they're not really keeping in touch with their family there. And then, you know, we actually go, and I can tell that, like, they're proven wrong, you know, like they're kind of surprised at how much better that they thought it was, because they were thinking of what it was in like 1970. You know? So I think one key is to like try to see if older folks are connecting with people at home, which I know is a part of the healing process. But and then, I mean, I think that like young people in OC, because I'm not from OC, but I spent a lot of time there in my childhood. I think there's a lot of young movement and energy there, and I think the young people are leading with this idea, like, you know, we should just all be one again and be like a real diaspora, as opposed to, you know, whatever their parents and grandparents are pushing.
I was wondering if there are still any sort of like lingering social remnants of the division of Vietnam, you know, from 1954 to 75, in the same way that, for example, like under capitalist unification, like annexation, you know, Germany still have the east-west divide. Yemen, you know, like the South Yemenis still have like a lot of resentment of the way that they were kind of like annexed by the North and so on. I would say Vietnam provides like a counterexample of social unification, and I was, you know, wondering how that looks in terms of like really healing that divide, right?
I think that like in terms of like among indigenous people, I don't know if there's a lot of that, because the previous, you know, hundreds of years of war, independence from, you know, Chinese, the French, the Japanese. I think in general, people are really just psyched to be unified again. In terms of like demographically though, so within the Communist Party of Vietnam, there's all these different wings, and it is like a business, pro-business wing. And a lot of the pro-business kind of factions are all from the South. So they, you know, the kind of like inclination is still there, I think, as like Ho Chi Minh City was a center of trade for so long, like the kind of mercantilism vibe is still there.
I don't want to answer this, but how do you, as a child of the representation possibly on the one, you have to be left on the one side anymore. How do you like deal with the, I would say, intergenerational trauma, generational trauma that you have to deal with, and also deal with the fact that it must be because they were wrong, and then because I think I've been back to Vietnam several times, but every single time they come back and say, in the end, we guys will do America's better.
What city?
What was I on? Like, or my dad is a Chinatown part of Vietnam,
Yeah.
and then my mom is like somewhere further. I forgot the name. But to deal with those, so I'm dealing with those, the toxic side about those communities, and then there's also some people in the community that kind of like are so want to be aligned with America that they'll change spelling of their last names, like
Oh
N
yeah.
to WYNN, like
Oh.
my sister's boyfriend's family has members in the family where they would speak English only, change their last name, and they're all doctors and medical people that higher up.
Yeah. What I'm going to type it out here so everyone sees. So Vietnamese names are notoriously hard to pronounce, but I know somebody whose last name is William, which is mine, and they changed it to Regent. So, in terms of intergenerational trauma, I think one thing that helped me a lot was to realize that like the way my parents are is something that imperialism did to them. They didn't choose that, you know, like without U.S. involvement, there wouldn't have been a war at all. They would have just had that election, which they would have won. So I think that helped me understand that a little better. And I think that there's only so much you can do, right? If someone wants to change their last name from Agent, like I think they're too far gone. But in terms of like kind of reconnecting with your family, I think that helped me a lot to understand why they are where they are. I think Luda just logged on.
We can also take more questions after the presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Hi.
Oh, she can't see it.
Hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, great. So nice. Is the audio look right?
It's good. I'm gonna turn you around so you can see everybody. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of Vietnam today. She lives in Vietnam. She's very knowledgeable comrade who does a lot of good education work around as well.
It's great to be here today and have a chance to meet you all and talk to you all. It's really awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Can you see everybody?
Hey!
Hi.
Great. Oh my God, it's so great to finally meeting you all. And actually, I am very surprised that there are many people, want to know about the history of Vietnam from my own country. And it's my honor to be here today. So today, we're going to talk about the history of Vietnam, a little bit about, Vietnam after the war, because before this, you just listened to, our three victories and how we won against the French, Japan, and USA. Now I want to talk about Vietnam after the war and the modern day. So I'm trying to make it very briefly. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me, okay? Now let's start. You know that today is the Liberation Day of Vietnam. And actually, it's a big holiday, and we have like 5 days off, like that. It's a big holiday like that, and the whole country, like, singing and dancing and have a parade in the big cities to celebrate this Victory Day. And this is a day that, the Vietnamese Communist Force liberated the South, occupied by the USA. And finally, we kicked out the last remaining US troops and ending the existence of the US controlled fascist puppets in the South. So probably know about the war itself, and as I said before, you already talked about that a lot. Now, let's start from Vietnam after the war, 1975. Okay, what happened after the communist war? This is also very interesting because how you see how communist government, work in a peacetime like that. So actually, in fact, from 1975 to 1985, Vietnam tried to build a communist society. My mother, my whole family lived through this time, and we shared a lot of stories about how this time works. It's just like, like Vietnam just walked out of the war and we were devastated. We were bombed back to the Stone Age by the USA just 10 years ago. So it was really hard. But for 10 years, from 1975 to 1985, we tried to build a society where we did not use money. And for example, I will show you some small examples so you can have some idea of how it worked in Vietnam at that time. So my mom told me that at that time, all the young people in the village will gather together and they work on the same rice farm together. And they, work on the rice farm and they're singing there and they, communicate each other, really happy time like that. And when they harvested the rice, they would bring all the rice to the big yard in the village. And then after that, they will, weight the rice of that day, then they separate it, equally to all the families in the village. That is how to make sure that even sick people or disabled people or old people, because they cannot work, they still have enough food to eat. So that was how it worked at that time. And we did not use money, we used stamps, we were food stamps. So after a month or something, they will calculate the amount of products or rice or like fish or pork they raise in that month, and then they will give back people like food stamp or like clothes stamp or like fabric stamps. So people can go to the national stores and claim back other gifts that they deserve. Okay? Basically, that's how it works. Now at that time, we still had some money, but it's only for black market. Like people still have the old society's money and they use that to exchange some goods so they can find a national store, but it's like not a main thing at all. There is typically we use like stamps at that time. But the hardest part is this. We tried for 10 years, again we failed. And the reason why we failed was quite complicated, but I would make it simple today. First of all is that Vietnam, we do not exist in a vacuum. We were just destroyed by USA, and we were like sprayed by Agent Orange, naval bombs, and all kind of weapons like that. So we need a lot of resources to rebuild our country. But sadly, we were heavily sanctioned by the whole world at that time. So we did not have enough food or medicine to save our people. For example, in order to feed our people, we need to do agriculture, right? And in order to have a good amount of food from agriculture, we need, for example, fertilizer. But we did not have enough fertilizer, and typically was sanctioned of we could not grow fast enough food to feed our people. So, and at the same time, the USA and China and Deng Xiaoping, they backed the Khmer Rouge, Cambodia. And the Khmer Rouge from the matter of 1975 to 1999 for 4 years, they continuously attacked the border of Vietnam, and the last straw that broke the camel's back was 1978, late 1978. They attacked a village in the border in An Giang province. They killed over 3,000. We still have a weekend to this day to show that the genocide of the Khmer. And that was why we had to send the Liberation Army to Cambodia to end the existence of the genocidal routine of the Khmer and to liberate the Indonesian Cambodian people. And that was the reason why the USA took it as an excuse to call for the United Nations to completely sanction Vietnam. And in the whole United Nations at that time in the 80s, only 2 countries that supported Vietnam at that time. It was the USSR and Czechoslovakia. The rest agreed to sanction Vietnam. Only Cuba at that time, the country who also under sanction. Cuba was the one who donated vaccines and medicines to Vietnam, allowed our neighbor also secretly trade with Vietnam, like clothes and basic stuff like the fish sauce or some like MSG, like very famous at the time. Laos MSG is very important now. So like that, the whole country in the whole world at that time, only 4 countries have Vietnam: the US, Laos, and so it was really hard, really tough like that. So until 1996, we made a decision that, okay, we have to open up our economy so we can save our start with that. So that was why in 1986 we started the reform and why we, open up our economy. Now here's the thing. This is also an important thing I want to explain to you too. The difference between Vietnam and North Korea, right? So in 1986, we made a very hard decision. We have two choices. Two choices. First of all, we can keep closing our economy, keep trying to build communism, our ideal society. But probably hundreds of thousands, even millions of people will die because of the lack of food and or we have to open up our economies where we can save our people. And Vietnam chose the second place. North Korea chose the fifth place. Okay? Now here's the thing. I don't think that we can or we should just either Vietnam or North Korea. We have the two countries that show you the two paths what a nation can choose under the huge pressure from the USA, the United Nations. All you can do is to look at both of us today and you see the pros and the cons of the past of the two countries did. And when maybe the same thing happened to your country, now which way will you choose? Nobody will just because it depends a lot on what you want at that time and why you want it. And that is the thing that like a lot of people just Vietnam are saying this because a lot of people dump on Vietnam because they said that we abandon communism, abandon Marxism, Leninism, so we can say blah blah. But that was part of Vietnam to make. And we decided to open our economy and we can say, so that was when the reform movement I was born. I was born when Vietnam was still under the US sanction. The thing started to ease out in 1994 when Bill Clinton visited Vietnam and stopped talking about, he's up. But a lot of people think that something ended in 1994. I was born before that, but sanction did not end in 1994. Actually, the last sanction was lifted until 2006. And that was why right in 2007, Vietnam joined the WTO. It was a huge day in Vietnam. I remember in that day, I was like, I think in high school. Yeah, I was high school at that time. And the television and everybody celebrated that finally, 2007, Vietnam joined the WTO, where we can trade with other countries. That is like, it should be the obvious thing right after Vietnam, the USA, but no, it's not. So actually, Vietnam only had around from 2007 to today, can you report? Really rebuilt another country like that. And okay, now I will tell you about how Vietnam changed quickly from the 1980s and 90s to today. And to show you how quickly, how fast Vietnam changed right now. My childhood, I was born with more poverty. And I did not have water at all. Actually, what I had in the family, it was a small well in the yard, yellow water. And my dad had to build our own filtering system, cement and gravel, and coal like that. And really, my chores every day was to carry buckets of water from the family well to the filtering system. And I hated that. It's so heavy and it's so hard for me to relax. But no, I had to have a family because everyone is busy trying to support every making food for the family. There was no stable electricity. Usually there was no electricity from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or half day like that. Only electricity after 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. And we had to arrange our family activities around that electricity plant. And of course, there was no fresh milk. At that time, what we had was condensed milk and a baby sugar. It was so fancy. And at that time, whenever somebody got really sick or in the hospital or something, the fancy like gift they usually give to those sick people is a can of condensed milk and a bag of sugar. It was my dreams like food at that time. The first time I tasted fresh milk was when I was 15 years old. That was how, like, you know, like it was like a dream for me that I can taste it, fresh milk from a little box like that. Okay, so I have mostly almost my childhood or almost like your grandparents like that. But now I am sharing the same life experience like you. I mean, clean water, TV, milk, and talking to you right now to the internet using your language. So that is how fast Vietnam changed in a matter of just 30 years. You know, and it takes, you know, the USA like 70, 80 years. And Vietnam only 30 years. That's how quickly like that. Okay, now I'll go to the modern day like this. Vietnam. Fun fact. Vietnam and many other countries in Asia, we use a multi-dimensional poverty index. Multi-dimensional poverty index. It means that not only just abroad, we also consider the access to clean water, education, electricity, healthcare, internet as, you know, poverty amount. If you cannot access any of those that I listed before, you'll consider unpoverty. And okay, and following this multi-dimensional poverty index, the extreme poverty rate of Vietnam right now is 3%, and we plan to eliminate it by 2025. And right now, the government is building houses for people in extreme poverty to make sure that by 2025 there will be no houses in Vietnam. And go back to compare it to the sale of the UK. Now, until now, yes, in the UK, you don't use multi-dimensional poverty index. You only use the income alone. And with the income alone, the poverty rate of the USA and the UK is still very high. And I cannot imagine how high that number will be if the US apply the same poverty index as countries like Vietnam. That is how how you should think about the number that your country is going to you and choose like that. And in 2024, Vietnam is the fastest country, the country that has the fastest growing economy in Asia. Despite the fact that we just, a huge impact of COVID-19, but we still managed to keep our economy stable. Okay, now with all the things that I told you about, how Vietnam changed and the achievement that it had in modern days, a lot of people. I mean, yeah, a lot of people who say that, oh, all is good because Vietnam, uphold capitalism and love capitalism. That's all because of capitalism. It's actually not. Because that shows a very shallow understanding of the system today. The truth is, the system that we are following today is socialist oriented market economy. It is not a free market, absolutely not free at all. To show you how not free it is, some examples of this. Okay. If an international corporation wants to have a factory or a branch in Vietnam, that factory in Vietnam must be owned at least 51% by Vietnam, or else it's not allowed in Vietnam at all. The second is corporations or business, even Vietnamese business, cannot own any farmland. That is in the law. So 70% of Vietnamese people are farmers, and 90% of our minorities are farmers. So farmland is essential part of the life. All the land of Vietnam is publicly owned. It's not, no private ownership is allowed. All the land is publicly owned. Farmland are owned, could only be owned by real farmers, no corporations, no company can own. What we do, what the corporation produces is, for example, Vinamilk is a big milk company. Milk. Of course, we don't make milk, they need grass and cow. You also know they need land, right? So what they did, even with the fact that they cannot own any farmland, what they did was they had to go and talk with farmers in an area that they want to put a farm there. They have to persuade the farmers to need to work with the partner, with the company to raise the grass and to raise the cows for them. The company will give, like advices and equipment for the farmers to how to grow the grass, how to raise the cows, and then they will have to buy back raw milk from those farmers to be the source material for their factories. That is how it works in Vietnam like that. Same as rice, Vietnam is the second biggest rice exporter in the world, only after India. And all the rice farms are owned by the rice farmers, not rice corporations. What corporations could do is they buy back the rice from the farmers, and in the law, they make sure that all the rice farmers must get at least 30% of profit. It doesn't matter about how low or how high the price in the world. Farmers must obtain at least 30% of the profit. All right, and that is written in law. And the topic about important is that now we have a price stabilization program. It is to make sure that essential products like rice, pork, and medicine are always cheap. Even extreme poverty, people in extreme poverty can afford it. That is very important for you to understand that. It's, for example, it's like if you say apply the same program, it means that your government makes sure that the price of bread and wheat and beef always cheap. So even most people in extreme poverty can afford it. That is the same as now. And we have the two different set of price. No, like export the rice. We will follow the quote free market, high or low, it depends. But in Vietnam, the price always low. That is our domestic law for the price of rice. So that is a difference, It's not a free market, absolutely not. Another big example was that okay, we do have a private business in Vietnam, but the Vietnamese government only allow them to be in higher risk industry or the recent industry such as gasoline, internet, water, electricity. They all owned by state company, and the price or the regulation must be followed by the government to make sure that everybody can afford that. That is very important. It's not like private corporations can do whatever the heck they want. So that is important to understand that there are a lot of regulations for gasoline business. So they cannot just make from like disaster such as what happened in during COVID-19. Vingroup is one of the biggest private corporations in Vietnam, and they currently they're selling electric cars. So it's a really lot of cars. During COVID-19, you know what they got? In 2021, I think, the government requested Vingroup to stop making cars, and instead forced them to make ventilators. And we seized all of those ventilators, donated. We didn't even buy them. We seized all those ventilators, and we donated it to the hospital and to other countries that need ventilators. That was how the government passed over the private corporate. So to show you that those small examples, show you how not free this market of Vietnam is. There are a lot of regulations that business have to follow. The point is to protect the people, to make sure that we can profit from the business, not the other way around. And it's also like another fun story I'm back about COVID because I saw some of you asked about the COVID response now. But during COVID, there are a lot of products like eggs, chicken eggs, sold at a lower price than the loss. And the government forced the companies to take the loss. So they buy the eggs from farmers with high price, but they have to sell those eggs with a normal low price for COVID. The company take the loss. So that is the interesting part about economy in Vietnam is that okay, of course, what issues Vietnam still have? We have problems. So, for example, we still have pollution. Pollution is a big Vietnam, especially in modern society today, and we are trying very hard to educate our people to stop littering, especially to the ocean and to the earth. And I can tell you a true story that I see about generation. So about a few months ago, there were firework festival down in the city where I'm living. So we went out at night, sit on a beautiful riverbank, waiting for the fireworks to start. And people started taking out their snack. As a big family sitting right next to me. A big family of like 10 people, like 3 different generations, old grandparents and their children and their children, like that. After fireworks is done, everybody comes up to go back to their home. So all like the grandparents, born in the 50s and 60s, they just throw their trash to the river. But their children, their son and daughter, no, they clean up all the trash and take home with them. They did not throw the trash out like that. So that is how our education, like successfully educated our people. It's really hard to explain to people born in the 50s, 60s how plastic is so bad, right? We did it to the generation in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So that's it. The second problem we still have deforestation issue, especially during the war. USA was over Vietnam, destroy our forest, crops. It was very bad. And 1970s and 80s, many of us still have same kind of old habit of like burning forests to make space for farming crops in the future. And we've been trying so hard to react those people to teach them a new way, more sustainable way to protect our forests and regrow our forests after the war like that. So now, easy check the map in Asia. Actually, Vietnam is has the highest ratio of forest. Like 56% of our nation is have the forest in jungles. And that is a very good actually number. And we are regrowing because we know that our country is and with the climate change going on, very much like with a lot of our labor laws to raise the ocean water line like that. But yeah, we are regrowing a lot of more growing, and hopefully in the long run we will have like our jungle like before the war. And the last but not least, one of the reality is corruption. Corruption is big in Vietnam. Especially in Vietnam in 1910s. From 1910 from 2010 to 2016, Vietnam was controlled by neoliberals. Neoliberal government at that time ruled Vietnam, and they were so corrupted, it's so bad that it took the new government to this day to deal with corruption. And in the last like 4 or 5 years, nearly every month, Vietnamese, the peer news, okay, this CEO go to jail, this government workers, this minister go to jail for corruption. And that become like, that has become a normal thing now. You see like a high-ranking member in the US, I don't know, in the Vietnamese government, go to jail and receive like lifelong sentence because of corruption like that. Imagine if like the mayor of New York City in the USA go to jail with corruption. No, it doesn't happen like that. In fact, yes, in Vietnam we have corruption, but it is illegal. People are arresting and those who are paying for the crimes. The legal says you legalize it. You call it that is a different system. Right now, and right now the fight against corruption is going to and we have quite trust and hope in the new government for dealing with corruption and have a better society with less corruption. Sure. I mean the important thing is that we are not saying that we're not saying that we don't have problem. We admit that we have a huge corrupt system before, and we are trying to deal with that. We admit that. We have a deal with it. The difference is that in like the government, you don't even admit it. You try to legalize it. So that is the difference. Okay, so that is my cross speech to you. Now, if you have any question.
Sure. Oh, okay.
Can you hear this? Good. Ready to approach the laptop.
Hello?
Wait,
Can you hear?
can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to like duck down so that she can see
Can
you.
you hear me?
There you are.
I love your scout. I have the same scout.
Okay, so what was my question? Oh yeah, so we know that Cuba is still going through a very strong economic sanctions. People having issues accessing food, and we know that people are trying to mobilize. Obviously, the Western powers trying to mobilize, always trying to get anti-regime sentiments and reactions out of the people. And we know they use the visual of people in Cuba lining up to get food, and that's like a big propaganda point, right? For Western countries. Did Vietnam have a moment like that in the 80s and 90s where there was any sort of like anti-government, anti-communist sentiment, and what was the response to that?
Thank you so much for your question. Yes. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I know how like the difference is this: Cuba has been under sanctions over 60 years. It's inhumane, decent in the USA. Even the whole United Nations requested the USA to stop the sanction, but they still veto because they have the veto power. That is very sad. So that says how much the U.S. action is going against the will of the whole world. And in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, in the early 90s of Vietnam, at that time, we did not have any anti-government, anti-communist protests like that. Because first of all, the U.S. did not have enough time to inject those propaganda into our head. And at the same time, at the time, we were dealing with, the Khmer Rouge in the border of Vietnam and also in Cambodia too. So, actually the trust of the people on the government at the time were very high. And how do I explain to you that? Like people, especially Vietnamese people, when in a hard time together, we very much unite with each other. We build our country like that. And it was like a very, like a public decision of Vietnam at that time to support each other. At that time, like we just got out of the war with the USA, devastated, but we still, wanted to help our neighbor in Cambodia and in too. And at the same time, Vietnam we asked for volunteer, like people to go fight against the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. And a lot of Vietnamese young people volunteered to go there support. At the same time, people like my dad. My dad was a lucky person because my grandpa, my dad died in 1968 during the death of cancer. Because my dad was the son of the military, so he was chosen, because also he had good grades at that time too. So he was chosen to be one of the 200 Vietnamese students to be sent to the USSR, Belarus, to study like civil construction, something like that. He learned how to drive heavy trucks and equipment and to make the roads. So my dad volunteered to go to Laos to build roads, allow people to connect Laos with Vietnam. So like you have to understand that, like even in extreme hardship like that, Vietnamese people very much unite with each other, trying to give whatever you can to help our people, our families, and even our neighbor countries like that. So it was a high time of unification, the solidarity between Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia like that. So yeah, and of course, as I said, the U.S. just lost the Vietnam War 10 years ago, so they did not have enough time to inject those anti-communist propaganda into our society. It is different. It's a different story that I've been using the internet and a lot of propagandas and lies to fabricate a lot of, lies, false information, disinformation about Vietnam. But that's a different story.
We have time for one or two short ones. I'm just curious, like, what does political organizing look like in Vietnam today? Because if, like, I don't know if it's just like one communist party or several, or if most of the organizing is focused on like winning elections and like managing things like a higher state level, or if there's also kind of what I call like grassroots or smaller level organizations also being built alongside this.
No! I really wanted that answer. Luna.
The question was too good.
The question was too good.
Shut it down.
Huh? I do have that little symbol. Oh no, she's not. Very Can you hear us? Can you hear us? No.
Okay. You hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear
Okay.
you. Yes.
I don't know if you caught the question, but it was about kind of what the focus of political organizing is like in Vietnam today. Is it?
Oh my gosh, laugh. Between the
I'll send you a chat. Yes.
Vietnam
Maybe she goes.
and the USA. I can hear you. Yes. Yes.
Okay, maybe it's just a video then. The question was about political organizing in Vietnam today.
No, no, no.
I think it's lagged.
I
think it's lagging. Like,
part one of the organization. Oh my gosh. The lagging is.
They want to start a new one.
Okay, let me start the answer. Okay. Number one, about the organization, how like to organize in Vietnam. Actually, it is a great question. And you asked the right person because I am a member of, a volunteer group in Vietnam. We do organize a lot of things, like events in Vietnam too. And okay. Good.
No.
Someone turn off the lights.
Just get on Signal and put it in the mic.
I put it in the chat, but maybe she can get back to us if her connection improves. We can post that answer. Until then, I think that will conclude the event. This is the last event in the space. Please check it out. The more you buy, the less we have to move. And we're all going to be in the neighborhood still. The next space we're excited about. It's be bigger and better. Thanks for coming.
So much. If you could fold your chairs and just put them against the wall, that would be fantastic. Also, one more round of applause for Gage for giving that wonderful presentation. Should I cut the live stream? Cut it off.